Now, the other thing about leptin, as I mentioned, now leptin is released when the fat cells are full. Yeah? However, your fat cells are full and they're going, okay, stop. Your brain says, I'm ignoring you because I'm still stressed. I'm going to be releasing corticotropin. So corticotropin, CRH, carries on releasing. Is that leptin is taken notice of, assuming that you're not stressed anymore. If you are still stressed, the brain is saying, I'm going to ignore you because we're going to be needing that easy access energy because berries aren't necessarily always available. While we've got it, we'll carry on eating it, thank you very much, because I need to keep replacing that energy because no harm in having a bit too much energy in case the lion comes along again. So hence we carry on. Make sense? Yep. Oh, I'd already pressed that button. Okay, well, I already said that on the screen. I didn't see that. So we have different regulating aspects to our body. Leptin, as we've just discovered, is leptin regulates fats, in essence. But it's also the thing that's released by fats. It's a weird... Yeah. But think of it in terms of regulation. When our fats are fine, it releases leptin. Regulation of carbs or sugars, insulin is in charge of that. And for proteins, mTOR. Now, mTOR is quite a complex thing. It's in charge of so many aspects of protein synthesis, behaviour of amino acids. The list is endless. In this particular context, just think of it as being the regulator for protein. Not proteins, but protein. It's also part of your immune system because, again, amino acids are part of in terms of antibodies and protein production. And mTOR is a regulator for that. So in simple terms, insulin encourages your body's cells to drain glucose from your blood and store it as glycogen in your liver and the muscles of your body. It's a storehouse. Do you need any more? Okay. So then that is used as an energy source for your body as and when required. And it also stops the body burning fat to create energy. So if you've already got plenty of sugars in your body, why would your body want to use up your backup of your fats? So again, this is another reason of where sugars and fats play a role, is that if one is talking about losing weight, then actually you need to reduce your sugar intake because you need to get the body to start burning fat. If, however, you're consuming lots of sugars, and this is the argument for if you go on a low-carb diet, is that if you're eating carbs, then the body's going to be using that, not your stored energy. Yeah? Make sense? So leptin controls food intake and energy expenditure in the same sort of way. Again, these sort of work together anyway. And as I've already mentioned, mTOR modulates protein synthesis and also has a variety of roles, including cell growth, manufacture, immunity, and other things. Any questions about that? No? Silence. Okay, so we've gone from the two-sided argument. However, I would argue there's actually a third. This is where I bring out my lollipop sticks. Some of you may have already seen these before. Now, from my point of view, there is a third part of your response mechanism. And I've made it deliberately in this sort of format. To me, this has, I suppose, certain applications when it comes to things like meditation. Your body is, and I use this thing because this, as an analogue, this is actually really useful in terms of from a structural point of view. I think some of you have seen these three as if we look at the body as a single continuity. Our jaw, our pelvis, and our jaw, our shoulders, and our pelvis, they work together. In the terms of how your body functions, we have your sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight, parasympathetic nervous system, digest and repair, and your enteric nervous system, something somewhere in the middle. Okay? Now, interesting thing about the enteric nervous system is in basically your guts. Okay? Now, your guts is often referred to as your second brain. And there's a good reason for this, is there are about 100 million neurons in your gut, and it's 9 times as many of those neurons tell the brain what to do rather than coming the other way with the brain telling the guts what to do. One could, in simplistic terms, say this is what's that gut feeling, following your gut. About 90% of your serotonin is produced in your gut. And there is lots of evidence to suggest that serotonin is also related in terms of another amino acid called histamine, which you may hear a little bit more about because it's related to histidine, but it doesn't really matter at the moment. It's an inflammatory response, and there is decent evidence to suggest that when your guts are in pain or inflamed, you're going to get migraines because serotonin generates pain. And then the migraines can start in your gut and then head on upwards and become a migraine. So this is another one of these reasons of why, as we mentioned before, is that high serotonin levels give you the weight gain and libido loss plus migraines. Is because there is, again, it's relatively little understood at the moment in real terms, but just because you're having pain in your gut doesn't mean to say you're going to feel the pain in your gut necessarily. Because it's a hormone, because it travels all around your body, technically speaking, you can have pain anywhere. In the case of serotonin, because there's also serotonin produced in your brain, there's sort of this matching jigsaw puzzle that basically heads for your head. Again, it's a little bit incorrect, but as a basic terms, it's not far off the truth. So we take these 3 parts of your autonomic nervous system. Now, the other interesting thing about your enteric nervous system is you can choose to follow it or not. You can choose to follow your gut response or not. It is semi-independent. So some people would say it isn't part of your autonomic nervous system. Other people would say it is. It is. Okay? Because it can operate completely independently. You know, peristalsis goes on long after you're dead. There's been, you can basically remove just your guts and put it to one side, and it'll carry on doing most of what it's doing, and it will release the hormones and other things. It's an interesting part of your body. Interesting, the medievals, there are quite a few interesting diagrams of men and there's a face in the guts here. And there's various references to this being an emotional thing. I think even the Egyptians talk about it in terms of this area. I'm not sure. You probably know more about this than me, I think. Yeah. So let us take these. Now, the reason I've got this is that everything works together. And again, the nearest analogue I've got to this is that, let us say, we have our resting state, parasympathetic, crossed with fight or flight. Yeah? Now, just hang on with it, because I'm not going to hopefully not flick elastic bands in people's eyes. For those who have been to the anatomical ones, sometimes this happens, doesn't it? Elastic bands go flying. And you add this central one that sort of goes between the two. And this is the trickiest bit. Ta-da! Yes. And then what we do is then we add the other connecting tissues, the fascia, that fascial tone. Imagine these elastic bands are your muscles and your fascia, but in this case I'm referring to fascia, your sinews. What you have is you have a structure that holds itself together based on tension. And if everything's right, we have this diamond shape, which I think is rather nice. Okay, it's quite stable. Yeah, it keeps its structure. When everything's right, it's diamond hard and maintains its tension. It's built like a suspension bridge. It relies on the hull to function correctly. Okay? Now, even though they are totally independent, there's no glue or anything, as you can see. This can go up and down. Fight or flight can go up and down, and also then parasympathetic can go up and down, and also the enteric system can also move independently. And also, if one becomes imbalanced, then you get the structure starts to have to alter, starts to distort, and then it starts to collapse if the tension isn't right. Yeah? Make sense? I'm going to pass that around. Okay? So it's creating a shape, it's creating a hole, and it depends on all three. Now, interestingly, there's a lady called, in recent times, there was a female, and it is important that she was a female at this particular point, called Shelley Taylor. And she was a female scientist and researcher, and noted that all the experiments done on fight or flight by the likes of, say, Walter Cannon and his cronies, and pretty much everybody since, was always on male lions and male zebras, and in fact males generally, because apparently like attracts like. What do we want to look at female hyenas for? No, we're going to do all our lovely experiments on fight or flights against the males because they're big and strong and they know how to fight. And she was having a look at the response of female lionesses, and it turns out they do something a little bit different. Now, female lionesses can be very aggressive, and indeed they do some hunting, and they are quite aggressive against zebras.
Do 90% of the hunt.
Maybe well. However, they also have something called a tend and befriend response, which relies on a particular hormone called oxytocin. Hint, hint. Now this is to do with self-preservation of the family unit in the case of lionesses, is that if a male lion gets either booted out, then the automatic response of the male lion is to kill off any of the previous cubs and instill his own seed so that he gets his own little cubs. And what lionesses do is they chummy up to the new lion. Rather than either attack or run away, they go, well, actually, I want to be fairly safe here. He's a nice cave, not a bad-looking lion there. Is it silly of me to run away or to find someone else? He's obviously stronger. I'll chummy up to the lion and persuade him with my little pheromones that actually this young cub is actually his. Because she's a mum, and there is no way she's going to let the lion kill off her little baby. One could, if one was wanted to take this far, that is akin to love in animals, the protective motherly instinct. And this was shown as, in the same way, and I think I've mentioned this before, is the famous experiment by Dr. Harlow. There is no way he'd be able to do these experiments anymore because they are a list of experiments that would make most animal rights protesters get really funny. At the very least, I think guns would be out, at the very least, is that he did an awful lot of rather nasty experiments on monkeys, and particularly on baby monkeys. And this was following an argument by the Freudians, as they reckon that love did not exist. It was all about reliance on being able to have the cave provided for, nutrition, and all this stuff about love was all a load of rubbish because psychologically it didn't make any sense whatsoever. And so therefore he started lopping off heads of motherly monkeys and sticking them on sticks, and one of them would have a bottle of milk or the milk provided for, and the other one would have a piece of terry toweling attached to there. And in the cases, the baby monkeys always went for the terry toweling with the scent of the mother rather than where the food came from. It already knew how food was the thing that then it would die doing it. So therefore it was shown at that particular time that comfort, or ostensibly love, is actually more important to, at the very least, baby monkeys than actually being fed nicely. And it sort of debunked this idea that it's all about being fed and watered. There were several other experiments that went on from that showed that those babies that experienced this stressful encounter, the ones that were sort of shown to actually were proved to be right, when they went back to the family unit, when they hit adolescence, it showed their ground state stress levels were much higher, and they would act in a similar way to a kid acting up more, like in human terms, is that you'd have behavioural disparities for those babies that had actually had an early stress response is because it experienced this stress response very early, so its ground state, its fascial tone, was actually still much higher than its other siblings who would have actually experienced comfort at a very early age. Which is, again, is quite interesting in the same way we were talking about this. Depending on what your experience is, your levels of stress at sort of a normal operating temperature, if you like, is different depending on your own experiences, your own memories and other such things. And the earlier you have it, the more that ground state is set in. So these kids would get stressed very quickly. And when adolescence, which is quite stressful, then they would start to act up and have behavioural difficulties, which supports the argument in terms of that babies do have memory, and you have a stressful pregnancy or a stressful birth or even a stressful childhood, it will affect you long way down the line, even if you have no actual coherent memory of it. That make sense? Okay, so let me grab this back. So I find this a rather interesting little model. Okay? We have a rather severe side, the fight or flight response, if you like, and we have sort of the side of rest, digest and repair, side of mercy maybe. And in the middle, comfort, love, tending, befriending. I think it's quite a nice diagram, really.
Rectangular. Could you define a little more?
I find it's a rather interesting pattern. It looks like something I can think of.
No.
Yeah. Tree of life, maybe? Possibly, maybe? Now, I have designed this thing in a particular way because one could also classify that sex is maybe down here somewhere. Yeah? Because it's sort of a fairly baseline gut type of thing. One tends to think of it as a brain of its own, particularly males. Yeah? So maybe it's a third brain, I don't know. Yeah? Now, interestingly enough, and again, I put fight or flight because they are opposite responses in essence. It doesn't have to be in this particular way, but I find it's for this illustration, it sort of works. It's because fright is a very static response. In other words, it's halfway between the two, as your body wants to go fight and flight, but it can't do so, therefore it's stood still. In the case of the digest and repair, I put repair at the top and digestion at the bottom, and interestingly rest in the middle because it's static and it's restful. It is inactive. Yeah? So we have this rather nice line in between. Because, as, say, meditation as an example, it is an active process, yeah? But you are at rest. Your body needs to be engaged but relaxed. It is this using, in essence, to a certain degree, both your sympathetic and parasympathetic systems at the same time to a certain degree. You have to be paying attention. You have to be alert. But at the same time, you have to be relaxed. You have to be paying attention to the breath, but at the same time, your body should be as relaxed as possible. You need to decrease your fascial tone. And what is interesting about meditation is there's been some studies done on yoga meditation, and the vagus nerve, which is the nerve about here, is apparently stimulated when you're in meditation. Now, the vagus nerve, interestingly, has a dual role because it plays a part when you are stressed, but also plays a part when you are relaxed. It is one of the few sort of, in fact, it's the only one I know of, and there are arguments about whether it has a dual role or not. But in essence, when you're in a meditative state, apparently the vagus nerve is stimulated and is going, okay, this is pretty cool. But it is not inactive. There is actually a lot of stuff going on. This also applies to sleep as well. So I find it nicely interesting. This sort of middle point is where you're not chilled out, man, because being chilled out doesn't really necessarily work for meditation. Fairly agree? But you're not running away necessarily. Well, let's hope not. Yeah. So it's somewhere in the middle. You need to be in that sort of tend and befriend stage. That
creative tension.
Yeah. That'll do. I mean, you can use a series of... and also, you can't be all up in your head, and you also can't be thinking about other things. So you've got to be roughly somewhere square in the middle. Nice analogy from my point of view. Yeah? We need to be in a state of love. Yeah? Works for me. Now, something I haven't mentioned so far, because I don't really know much about this at all, Part of your brain has something called the reticular formation and the reticular activating system. Now, the zebra, we've already seen how that works with a zebra, is that when the the African buffalo, I keep calling it a water buffalo, the African buffalo comes into view, the reticular formation is a squelch control, it's got something that's entered into its five senses, and it makes a very quick decision of, is this threatening or not? Based on memory, based on what we know, based on how I'm feeling, how I'm reacting, what's my gut reaction, my instinctual things, all the information I'm getting, that's a water buffalo. Water buffaloes know we're okay with that. It's a decision maker. It sort of says, no, we're okay. Don't start kicking in fight or flight. We're okay with that. Yeah? So it stops bothering the brain with it. Okay? Reticular activating system apparently is classified as being the gatekeeper of consciousness, which is a really big word. It is.
You can explain it?
No, because I know bugger all about it. I'm sorry. Again, but it's an interesting little. Again, it's an interesting sort of veil, if you like, up here. Is that this is a deciding factor? Is that if he lets you through there, you get to have a chat with the big boss. Doesn't think it's important enough? No chance. Okay?
So the reticular cortex?
I've no idea what you mean by reticular cortex.
Okay.
Explain more.
No, I was asking a question, Gav.
No, I don't know anything about the reticular cortex. Whether we're referring to the same thing. Okay, so whether we're referring to the same thing, the only references I can find with regards to this, because you mentioned this before, I can find no reference to reticular cortex, and if someone else has got input, please do so. The only references I've found to this are reticular formation and reticular activating system. Now, where am I? I've just lost my little place here.
Can I ask you another question, please?
Certainly.
Do you include in the enteric nervous system
Yes.
the solar plexus?
Yes.
Thank you.
Because it's part of the diaphragm. Yeah. Now, fascially, in other words, our sinews, there is an interesting little connection here, is that traditionally our guts are reckoned to be in a separate bag to our lungs and our heart. Okay, so imagine two bags. In fact, I'll draw it, easy enough. One bag. And, yeah. Two bags. And we have what's called the intercostal margin, which supposedly divides your lungs from your guts by your ribs. Okay, in the middle of it is that little knobbly bit called the xiphoid process in the middle. Yeah? Like that. And actually, I was there. In a dissection, what we found, and actually the Chinese discovered this millennia ago, actually. However, we were the first to do this. It's actually one big bag, and that's your pelvic basket. And this is about here, with your head on there. Yeah? Now this one single bag with your diaphragm there means that this is, once again, a single continuity. They are naturally connected together. When you get stressed, when you feel anxious, it's about here, roughly in the middle. Yeah? Make sense? That goes on for too long. Can you see? Now if we're a single continuity, just like my shirt, it's got lots of stripes on it, I'm creating tension here and also across here. It affects the whole body. And in fact what we're also seeing is that people that are bent over using walking sticks, don't get me started on this, the chances of them having stroke or heart attacks goes up quite significantly, because quite literally we're squishing the heart. It's not able to beat properly. I spend half my time getting little old ladies off walking sticks. Because guess what? If you're in this position, what's happening? My head is over here. My lungs are half the capacity they should be. I'm putting pressure on my heart. What are the chances of me being healthy and happy? Fairly unlikely. It puts stress on the body, because stress all the way down here, physical stress. And that's all that implies, really. Body's under stress, then your brain's going to be under stress, as are your emotions, and your fight or flight mechanism is unlikely to not be operating. Sorry, wrong way around. Is likely to be operating. Does that make sense? So I suppose the question really is it the case that, going back to your question, sorry, Alan, with regards to the enteric system, you could argue, is it altogether, is your inner workings actually all the enteric system, or are we just talking about just the guts? When we're talking about the second brain, we are referring in essence to your intestines. In terms of the system as a whole, those inner workings, I would argue it's probably the whole bag. Your organs, all of them. And one could even take it to the brain again, because it's all connected in some sort of way. But yes, but I don't know is the real answer, because I don't really know. But I'd say yes. That make sense?
Thank you.
Yeah.
I just thought I'd throw in, I saw this very interesting article in the paper or online, I can't remember, the other day, and it was all about standing up to work, and it showed Winston Churchill and a couple of other famous people, and they used to stand at their desk. And I was just thinking, the very nature of being, even if you're trying to hold yourself
absolutely.
up, you're over a table the whole time.
I study when I read.
Yeah.
When I study, I stand.
Yeah.
I get a lectern. It's much easier.
Yeah. And it was just showing these guys standing to do what you've just said.
Yeah. And there's so many other things applied to that. Say Alexander technique or vocal coaching, they always talk about you need to be up because you need to generate resonance from here all the way up to create the acoustic sound of your head, quite literally. All the stuff. Ask Sally about that, not me. But there is a vibrational quality in terms of quite literally we change acoustically depending on how we stand. Now, if vibrationally we are different, then there are going to be other differences right across the board, just based on standing, eye position. Well, there are so many possibilities with regards to this. Now, going back to this vagus nerve before I forget too much about this. During meditation, sympathetic tone of muscle tissue is reduced. Okay, this is going back to Robert Schleip again. So again, we're talking about sympathetic tone. That means your sinews, your fascia, is held in a particular sort of stasis based on your previous experience, memories, how you react to things generally. Your ground state of tone. And we're not talking about muscles, we're talking about your fascia. Yeah? When you meditate, it reduces that sympathetic tone significantly. Yeah?
That's fundamental to the order teaching. Meditation is reducing tone through visualization.
Yeah. And also, however, your digestion and aspects of your immunity system are also lowered. So that means it's not going from there to there, this direction. This is reducing, and this is reducing, to come to a middle point again. So we know medically that this is what's happening with regard, as far as we know, in terms of they've been looking at yoga meditation specifically in these particular research studies. Research on yoga folk show stimulating effect of this vagus nerve, which is in charge of physical and emotional coherence. If there is an imbalance, we're unable to regulate anxiety. In other words, your fascial tone is too tight here. Then the medicine has now come up with a vagus nerve stimulation system, which is a type of implant that is directly for intractable anxiety. And quite literally, it stimulates the vagus nerve to have the same effect that meditation should have. And apparently it works very well. Yes?
The vagus nerve is the one that supplies the stomach, isn't it, as well?
Well, it goes sort of from here to about roughly here-ish.
You can sever it to stop you producing too much
okay.
acid.
Oh, okay.
And also another thing is...
too much acid, really?
Oh.
How did they come up with that one?
Well, I don't know. Didn't ask them.
I think we'll have to have a chat with people like that, because that's going to be my next bit about that.
What you were saying about meditation, the women, when they have their babies,
Yeah.
they can have, accidentally, if you touch something particular, there are points particular inside the body, that they can have a vagal response, which completely, everything gets loosened, everything. That's the blood flow, the incontinence, and they pass out and they can practically heart stops.
Okay.
So it's just interesting.
Yeah. However, there's two things I'd say to that. One is acid production. What did we say about digestion repair and stress? What happens when you're in fight or flight, when you're tight, when you're stressed? What happens? Yes, your body does not produce acid when you're stressed. So that's a pretty dumb thing to do. Is by cutting off the vagus nerve, I'd say that's probably doing you way more damage than possible. And it's actually there was last February there was some research about the types of things those therapists have been banging on about for years. Is this whole thing about reflux and acid, and that once you pass, I think it's something in between anywhere between 35 and 40, is your, particularly in men as well, is your acid production drops like a stone. It sort of, I think it's reduces by about 40% or something, and continues to reduce as you get older. So you produce less and less acid as you get older.
Back to zebras.
Yep. Okay. So you're not producing much acid once you pass basically middle age. Interestingly, the average, OAP looks at their medicine cabinet and they've got two things in there, almost guaranteed. One is either milk of magnesia and Rennies, and the other one is laxatives. Why do you think that would be? Because if you're not really producing much acid as you get older, why on earth would you want to reduce it further? It's because a lot of people, they say, oh, I've got terrible acid, I get indigestion and all this stuff. Well, what if it isn't acid at all? What if it's reflux? Because this research study said the same as we've been saying for yonks, is actually 90%, this is the figure that we went, woohoo! 90% of people that are diagnosed with reflux, actually, it's completely the reverse diagnosis. It's because what's happening is that your body is not producing enough acid. In fact, it's producing no acid when you're stressed. Because traditionally, of course, this whole idea of people with stomach ulcers, oh, my ulcer, it's the stress. No, can't happen. Sorry, doesn't happen. If your body's not producing enough acid when you're stressed, how on earth can you get a stomach ulcer from too much acid in your stomach? It doesn't happen. It can't happen. Biochemically, it can't happen. It's ridiculous. And actually, in, I think it was the late 90s, I remember the story here, a couple of student medics, now, I think it's even in GCSE biology we learn this, is you're told this, when you're stressed you don't produce acids. When you go to medical school you're told, when you're stressed you don't produce acids, and yet every doctor comes across, oh well, you've got high stomach acids there because you're stressed. That's why you've got stomach ulcer. And these two young students, I think they had an argument with some of the professors at the Royal College of Surgeons and said, you taught us this and you taught us that, and yet you keep going on about stomach ulcers. Yeah? Well, how can this be? How can you possibly have high stomach acids if you can't produce stomach acids if you're stressed? You're talking rubbish, go away. And basically they got chucked out. And it took them 10 years to convince everybody. We now know that it's more to do with a bacteria called Helicobacter pylori, which most of us now know about, which is really easily treatable by antibiotics, not by antacids. And it turns out that stomach ulcers do not get produced over years or months. They can get produced in a matter of hours. Quite literally, it's less than 48 hours, I think, a stomach ulcer can appear. And actually, if your body's nice and healthy, it can take about 48 hours to disappear as well, if treated correctly. Because the stomach lining repairs really, really quickly. Because guess what? It's a bag that contains hydrochloric acid in it. And so therefore we need to get really good at repairing if there's a hole. Okay? What actually happens is these people are diagnosed with reflux is that your stomach acids are so low, is that your proteins are not being broken down properly, which is what the hydrochloric acid in essence does. and then they go to the small intestine and they start to rot. They don't break down properly, they're rotting, and they produce the acids that they have, and they start to produce gases. And then what happens, you get this bubbling up of acid, and it feels just like high stomach acids. And so therefore, what does your doctor do? You've got high acids, let's lower your acid levels some more, shall we? And so therefore, they bottom it out, and what happens is you then get an awful lot of protein that gets bunged up, and so therefore you need laxatives to get things going again because the body's not breaking it down again. And also on top of that, you also have plenty of flatulence and gases to go with it to get trapped wind. But in basic terms, get rid of the laxatives, get rid of the rennie, and probably you're going to be fine, and just have smaller meals. That make sense? Okay.
How come the doctors aren't taking notice of what is...
Do you want me to answer that without using expertise? Because unfortunately they're educated in pharmacology, in real terms. In my experience, and again I'm a little bit... so I'm making the microphone go bounce because I'm getting irritated by doctors. In my experience, and again, I'm generalising hugely because I'm being really unfair to doctors at this point, because ultimately doctors and surgeons, they save millions of lives, and surgeons particularly are very, very clever, and they do stuff that I could never do. However, the nature of the education, as far as I'm given to understand it, is that there is no requirement anymore for doctors to do any dissectional work at all. One of my key selling points, in fact, is that I've cut up more bodies than most doctors have, which is true, is because there is no requirement. To me, this is insane, is that if you don't know what the body looks like underneath the skin, if you don't know how it operates, because there's now no real requirement in terms to study digestion, how the dickens are you supposed to understand how the immune system works?
You read what's on your computer.
Exactly. In fact, I've heard several people say, this chap was Googling when I went to the doctor. It's like, what? Because Google is pretty unreliable. Some of the stuff that's on Wikipedia is quite scary.
Every time I see my GP,
yes.
I've sat here, he's sat there looking at the screen, talking to me.
Yeah. It's not good, because in essence there is so much weight on pharmacology, which is all very nice. Saves lives, no doubt about it. But the problem is it's not a holistic approach. And to be fair, within the NHS system, your average doctor has between 4 and 7 minutes to treat you. If I had 4 and 7 minutes, no chance. So I'm being rather unfair to doctors, but their level of knowledge is on year decreasing. You talk to a doctor that was educated in, say, the 60s, and his level of knowledge would be off the chart. It would be amazing. I had a chat with a chap who was 103 or something, and he was talking to me after I gave a little talk on fascial work, and he was really excited because he was a young doctor in the 1930s. Yeah. And he said that he was taught homeopathy, herbs, and chemical medicine, and they were doing this really amazing stuff because some of them got to go to China, and they were looking at some amazing stuff done with acupuncture and surgery, and the possibilities with regards to anaesthetics. He was really excited. Post-1937, you wouldn't find any doctors that were taught that at all because it was dumped for antibiotics. And he says, quite literally, he says that they were told to dump everything is because antibiotics was going to cure everything, and they really believed that. And quite literally, there were two camps. There was the probiotic camp and there was the antibiotic camp. And the antibiotic camp won. Interestingly, there is quite a few movements within the big pharma industry now to try and buy up the licenses for vitamins and probiotics, is because they seem to be doing better than the antibiotics are at the moment. Anyway, I won't get into that, but that's sort of... It's the education that I would argue that a lot of doctors are brainwashed now into treating allopathically. They're not interested in curing you. Well, not necessarily interested. They are being educated to just get rid of a patient and solve a symptom. But in real terms, that doesn't solve the problem. If the body works holistically, this means that how you think, how you feel, directly affects your physical nature. Then if you're just treating one aspect of it, then what happens to the other two? Does it have to adjust around what you're telling it to do? If your body is making 160 million decisions every second, what do you think a pile of insulin is going to do once every couple of hours or something? Or 3 times a day? I don't know how many times you take it.
I can give you an answer to that.
Yeah. Plays havoc.
Keep thinking.
Yeah. Yes. So there is a balancing act. Is it about survival? Are the side effects worth what it does? Again, it is. I'm being unfair, but in real terms, we can't expect medication done 3 times a day in a blob the body has to compensate for that incoming stuff. The same with thyroid hormone. Tiny little adjustments. You can't give someone a set dose and then tell them to come back in 6 months' time, because the body's making adjustments to and from with regards to thyroid hormone every second. So one set pill is going to mean it's going to create an interference pattern that will, say, make you gain weight or lose weight depending on how much thyroid hormone you have, as an example.
I know with the insulin that they have technology now where they are combining
timing.
It's locked into the body somewhere and it's pumping in.
Yes, there's some
on lead.
Yes, there's a nanotechnology thing. I think is supposedly got a little machine that actually is able to release, which has to be a step forward because of exactly that. They're obviously seeing exactly the same problem. Is you can't just dump a whole load of insulin in the system and expect it to work in those terms. Is that you'll end up peaking and troughing. It has to. It's basically giving the body a good slapping and go, okay, take note of that, rather than just giving it a little tap every now and again. Yeah. Again, that's sort of in answer to your question. To me, that's the way. The treatment is so symptom-based, is that it has its uses, but it's one part of the puzzle, and it's a very useful part. But I think there is noticeably huge gaps in their knowledge now, whereas before I think they were as good as they could be. And interestingly, those folks like Paracelsus and Culpeper, who quite literally 5 years ago were classified still as sort of medical heretics, you hear their names bandied about quite a bit in medical communities now, is because people are realising that maybe it wasn't all complete tripe. Modern medicine really is only 80 years old, really. You've got several thousand years worth of Western medicine plus another several thousand years worth of Ayurvedic and Chinese medicine before modern medicine came along. And what? All of their research was rubbish? Well, how did we manage to survive then as a culture? We'd all be dead if they were actually that useless, wouldn't we? Who knows? Anyway, we're sort of disappearing off track slightly here. Or I am, rather, anyway. Now, I have another little... Now I've just mentioned Paracelsus. Now there's another chap. This is just an interesting little thing, and I think, are we sort of lunchtime-ish? We're coming up to what was...
Past lunchtime.
Are we? We should have said. Okay. I've lost myself here. Yeah. So this is written by... Well, rather, this is quoting... Alcmaeon of Croton, one of my favourite little chappies, 500 BC-ish. One of the first people that we know of that did dissectional work in Western medicine. And his works were translated by Paracelsus, which some of you may have heard, who is in essence the father of modern chemical medicine. He was the one that created problems. It's his fault that we're actually in the situation we're in to a certain degree, but that's not fair. But in essence, he cured thousands of people from having syphilis and venereal diseases in the Middle Ages, really. Late 16th century. Because Gardenist medicine, herbal medicine, didn't really have any experience of venereal disease, oddly enough. We would have thought we would have done, but they didn't really have any answer to venereal diseases. And Paracelsus had this idea that by using, ostensibly, astrology and alchemical processes, he could come up with chemical-based medicines to treat these things, and worked very well. And so therefore you then had two camps. You were either going to be a Paracelsian or you were going to be a Galenist. And at that time, Galenism was sort of basically the big cheeses, the mainstream medicine, and this was more considered as being a bit way out there. And basically there was a war that really raged on across Europe for about 100 years until the British said, hang on a minute, how about we use the herbs that are good for the problems that we know herbs work for, and the ones that the chemical medicine works for, we use those. And everyone went, well, that's a good idea. And so from about 17th century to 1937, that's pretty much how mainstream medicine was. Very sensible of them. And then it all went pear-shaped post-1937. However, I digress. Alcmaeon states that the maintenance of health depends upon equilibrium of the faculties, moist and dry, cold and hot, bitter and sweet, and so on, and the predominance of any is productive of disease, for the predominance of any single one of them is disastrous. He says that disease occurs in some instances from excess of heat or cold, in some owing to excess or deficiency of food, and in some from the fault of the blood, marrow or brain. With these must be included the occasional occurrence from extraneous causes such as qualities of water, soil or district, or some unavoidable cause or things akin thereto. Health depends upon an evenly proportioned combination of qualities. Very prophetic of the man, I'd say, because presumably he observed a lot and looked at basically what was really happening. One holistic practitioner. And in real terms, this is what needs to work. The body is a single continuity in terms of it relies on everything working together. It doesn't operate independently. Nothing actually really switches off. The sympathetic and the parasympathetic and the enteric are all working at the same time to a greater or lesser extent. It just means that one has got predominance over the other at some point, depending on the situation that you're faced with at the time. Sounds sensible, really. I think we'll break for lunch.
Well, that's a thought.
Any questions on that so far?
Hundreds, literally. Hundreds.
Any that I might be able to answer?
Well, I think, wait, I just say this far, marvellous. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, let's go and have a quick lunch and get back to it.
Okay.